Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Nash Caldwell always believed he knew Juniper better than anyone else. After all, they'd been married for 5 years, sharing joys, challenges, and future plans. He remembered the day he proposed, the way her eyes lit up when she said yes. It felt like they had everything under control. But that night, sitting at the kitchen table with the TV's distant sound filling the comfortable silence, Juniper said something that brought Nash's world to a standstill. With the same calm someone would use to talk about the weather or a new restaurant, she said she was going out with a coworker on Friday. Nash blinked a few times, waiting for her to add something that might make it sound less absurd. But Juniper just grabbed another piece of bread, spread butter on it, and carried on like nothing had happened. He needed a moment to collect his thoughts. Maybe he'd misheard. Maybe she was testing his sense of humor with a terrible joke. But the way she kept her eyes on her plate, not looking at him, made a strange feeling creep up on Nash. "What?" he asked, with a calmer voice than anyone would expect in a situation like that. Juniper looked up, and for the first time, Nash noticed something different, something calculated, like she'd been waiting for exactly this reaction. "It's just dinner. It doesn't change anything between us," she said, her voice unsettlingly light. "I love you, and none of this will affect our marriage." Nash kept his gaze on hers, trying to detect a crack in that cool composure. But Juniper seemed completely at ease, like she believed it was all perfectly normal. His fork lay untouched on his plate, his appetite was gone. His heart pounded in his chest, but he wasn't about to show it. He wouldn't give her that power. Apparently, Juniper thought he would fall apart, maybe expecting him to blow up in anger or fire off indignant questions or give her an ultimatum. But Nash was different, and if there was one thing he knew how to do, it was control his emotions when it mattered. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He'd made up his mind, if this was a game, he wasn't going to lose. Then, to Juniper's surprise, Nash let a slight smile curve the corner of his mouth. "I see," he said in a nearly uninterested tone, picking up his water glass for a sip. Juniper's breathing turned a bit uneven. It wasn't glaringly obvious, but Nash caught it, and that was enough to confirm what he was beginning to suspect. She didn't want his permission, she wanted a reaction. Silence stretched between them for what felt like forever. Juniper tried to hide her confusion by looking down at her food, but Nash went on watching her with deliberate patience. "Well," he continued, now sounding almost too casual, "maybe I should go out with someone too, just to see what it's like." That was when Juniper really looked at him, without that practiced calm she'd shown before, but with something new, uncertainty. Nash couldn't hide his satisfaction at the slight tremor in her hand as she held her fork. She blinked a few times, like she was trying to process what he'd just said. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected Nash to answer this way. "You met someone?" she asked, trying to sound indifferent. He kept smiling and shrugged. "There's a woman at the gym I talk to a lot. Might be interesting to go out with her one of these days." That was the moment Juniper lost a bit of color in her face. The tables had turned, and Nash hadn't even really started playing yet. The silence that followed was deafening. Juniper's confident mask slipped for a split second, and Nash clearly saw it. The fork she was holding lingered in midair above her plate, unmoving. Her eyes, which had been full of certainty just moments before, were now a little wider, like her mind was trying to sort out the unexpected answer she'd just heard. Nash maintained his slight smile, leaning back in his chair like the conversation had no weight at all for him. But inside, he felt a calculated pleasure at watching Juniper get a taste of the uncertainty he'd felt just minutes ago. "Oh, I see," she muttered, trying to collect herself. She looked away, poking at her food. Nash noticed the subtle movement of her leg under the table, a slight tremor she was trying to hide. He knew her well enough to see she wasn't as confident as she seemed. Why was she suddenly so uneasy? If she really believed going out with someone else was no big deal, why was she clearly unsettled at the idea that he might do the same? Nash realized Juniper had been testing him, but now the test was backfiring on her. "Is there a problem with that?" he asked, keeping his casual tone. She let out a short laugh and shook her head. "Of course not. I just wasn't expecting that from you." He raised an eyebrow. "Funny," he said, crossing his arms, "because I wasn't expecting this from you." This time, Juniper didn't laugh. His words hit her hard, and the forced lightness she'd maintained until then began to crumble. She tried to pull herself together, raising her chin and speaking in a carefree tone. "So, who's this woman at the gym?" Nash smiled to himself. He'd known that question was coming. And what was most interesting was that Juniper wasn't even bothering to hide her sudden interest anymore. Before, she'd tossed out this idea of relationship freedom as if it were a modern open concept they could explore without fear. Now, just the mention of another woman was putting her on the defensive. "I'm not sure it matters that much," he said, picking up a napkin and wiping the corners of his mouth. "If it doesn't change anything between us, I don't see a reason to get into details." Juniper let out another short laugh, but the tension on her face was obvious. "So it's for real? You're actually going out with her?" Nash tilted his head a little, studying her, like he was trying to figure out what was going through her mind. "You're the one who said you wanted us to explore this together, right?" She opened her mouth to reply, but couldn't say anything. For the first time all night, Juniper seemed lost for words. Tension in the room was almost tangible. The confidence she'd shown when she first suggested this game was slipping away right before her eyes. What was supposed to be a way to test how much power she still held over Nash was turning into something else entirely. Nash didn't need anything more at that point. He already had what he wanted, the certainty that Juniper had never actually expected him to go along with her plan, and, more importantly, the certainty that she knew, deep down, she was about to lose something she never imagined she could. Without saying another word, he picked up his glass, drank the last sip of water, and stood up from the table. "Good night, Juniper." She stayed there, sitting, watching him leave the kitchen with a distant look on her face. And in that moment, Nash knew the tables hadn't just turned, he was in control. In the days that followed, something changed between Nash and Juniper. The house, once full of casual conversation and predictable routines, was now full of silences that spoke louder than any words. Nash went about his usual routine, acting like he wasn't bothered in the slightest by what had happened that night. He left for work, came home at the same time, but now he seemed lighter. That was when Juniper started to realize what was really going on. At first, she told herself it was just a phase, that Nash was faking indifference so she'd back down. But he didn't back down, in fact, he got even more unpredictable. The first time Juniper felt real discomfort was on a Wednesday morning when she was drinking coffee and saw Nash standing by the mirror in the hallway, adjusting his shirt collar. It wasn't the first time he'd done that, but there was something different. He checked himself more carefully, ran a hand through his hair, looked himself over twice. Then he picked up his phone and smiled. Juniper couldn't ignore the sudden racing of her heart, and for the first time, she felt something she'd never felt for her husband before, fear of losing him. She tried hiding her uneasiness throughout the day, but that image of him in front of the mirror kept coming back to her. Who was sending Nash messages? Had he really found someone? That night, as they sat on the couch watching TV, she commented in a casual tone, "You seem a lot more excited lately." Nash, without taking his eyes off the screen, just gave a small smile. "Do I?" She crossed her legs, trying to sound at ease. "Yeah, almost like you've been busier." This time he looked at her but didn't respond right away. His eyes seemed to measure her, like he was gauging what she meant. Then, calmly, he said, "Yeah, I guess I'm making better use of my time." The way he said it sent a chill through Juniper. Over the next few days, she found herself watching Nash more closely than ever. He got more texts on his phone. Sometimes he'd head out for a run earlier than usual. One day, he came home from work and went straight to the shower, humming a tune she didn't recognize. That was when her worst fear became reality. On Friday, the same Friday when she'd planned to go out with her coworker, Nash mentioned casually at breakfast, "I'm going out tonight." Juniper's coffee cup froze halfway to her mouth. "Oh, yeah?" She tried to sound unconcerned. "Yeah, with that woman from the gym." She felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She opened her mouth to reply, but nothing came out. Her mind spun, trying to find a logical response, some way to steer things in another direction. But there was no other direction. Nash had agreed to the rules of the game she herself had started, and now, for the first time, Juniper wasn't sure she was ready to play. That night, Juniper was home alone. Nash left without rushing, wearing a shirt she didn't even remember he owned, his cologne hanging in the air in the hallway. He didn't give any details, didn't ask where she was going, and didn't seem the least bit concerned that she supposedly had a date too. That was when it hit Juniper like a crushing weight: she didn't go out. The coworker who was supposed to have dinner with her sent messages asking if it was still on, but she didn't answer. How could she? Her thoughts were entirely consumed by Nash. She paced around the house for hours, trying to convince herself none of it mattered, but with every minute, the pressure in her chest got worse. Then, almost without realizing, she grabbed her phone and started opening and closing apps at random, looking for any distraction. But deep down, she knew what she was really doing: waiting for him to send a text, waiting for him to come home early, waiting for this all to be just a game he'd decide was ridiculous at the last minute. But Nash didn't come back early. He didn't message. He showed no remorse. That was when real desperation set in. Juniper spent the night on the couch, the TV running some random show, but she wasn't paying attention. Her eyes were on the door, waiting for the familiar sound of keys in the lock. By the time Nash finally got in, it was after 3 in the morning. He walked in calmly, with no hint of rush or guilt. Juniper could see he hadn't expected her to still be up, but she was. And in that moment, something inside her broke. "How was it?" she asked, her voice weaker than she wanted it to be. Nash took off his jacket, hung it over a chair, and looked at her with the same neutral expression he'd had for days. It was good. Those simple, direct words were like a cold knife cutting into her. She felt panic flood her body. She wanted to ask questions, get details, hear him say it was a mistake and it meant nothing, but she couldn't bring herself to say any of that. Nash wasn't hiding a thing, nor was he showing remorse, and maybe that was the worst part. He crossed the living room and disappeared down the hallway to the bedroom, as if the conversation had ended. Juniper stayed there, frozen, heart pounding so loud it echoed in her ears. She'd wanted to toy with Nash, to test him, to see him uncertain, but now she was silently begging for it all to just be a game. Only Nash wasn't playing anymore. The next morning, Juniper woke up feeling something she'd never felt before: real, overpowering fear. Fear that Nash wasn't the same man anymore, fear that this time she'd crossed a line she couldn't come back from. She got up slowly, her body feeling heavy with the weight of last night's anxiety. She headed to the kitchen and found Nash there, drinking coffee like nothing had happened. Seeing him so calm, so distant, knotted her stomach. It was like facing a stranger. He didn't say anything when she came in, he didn't even look up from his phone. He just kept scrolling, sipping his coffee once in a while. She cleared her throat, trying to loosen the tightness. "You got home late," she said, going for a casual tone. Nash didn't show much reaction. "I did," he answered plainly. That indifferent response only made her more nervous. Juniper pulled out a chair and sat across from him, searching his eyes for some hesitation, any sign this was still a game. But Nash didn't look like he was faking anything at all. He seemed genuinely distant, and that scared her in a way she'd never imagined possible. "Nash," her voice shook. She hated sounding vulnerable, but she couldn't help it. "What are we doing here?" He finally looked at her, studying her for a few seconds like he was deciding if it was worth answering. Then, in a calm tone that gave her chills, he said, "You tell me. After all, this was your idea, wasn't it?" Juniper felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. I never thought you'd really go through with it." Nash let out a laugh, but it wasn't amused, it was the laugh of someone who'd finally figured it all out. "What did you expect? That I'd beg you to change your mind?" She opened her mouth, but he didn't wait. "I've spent the last few days thinking about this, Juniper. Thinking about what it means that you'd suggest something like this. Thinking about what that says about us." She felt a tightness in her chest. "Nash, I messed up." He didn't blink. "You did." They were silent for a moment, painfully so. Juniper wanted to scream yes, that it was all a huge mistake and she never should have come up with such a crazy idea, but deep down she knew it wouldn't matter. Nash had made his decision. He stood, took his mug to the sink, and rinsed it calmly, like he was just finishing up his morning routine. Then he turned to her and, with a cold look, said something that took her breath away, "Thank you for showing me who you really are." With that, he left the kitchen without hesitating. A chill ran down Juniper's spine. She stayed there, paralyzed, as the panic in her chest grew. A few minutes later, when she finally worked up the courage to go into the bedroom, she found a stack of papers on the table. The divorce papers, already signed. Juniper's world fell apart in one go. She'd wanted to test Nash, to see how far he'd go. But in the end, she was the one who lost everything. Juniper was leaning against the bedroom door when she saw Nash take a suitcase out of the closet. The sound of the zipper in that heavy silence told her it was over. But, driven by desperation, she stepped forward, trying to hold on to any shred of control. "Nash, please," her voice shook, and she forced a smile that came off more like begging. "This went too far. I forgive you for going out with that woman from the gym. Let's just forget all of it. If you forget what I said about going out with a coworker, I'll forget what you did. Let's start over." Nash paused for a second, gripping the suitcase tightly. He looked at Juniper and saw fear in her eyes, not fear of losing him because she loved him, but fear of losing control. He let out a short, humorless laugh and shook his head. "I don't need your forgiveness, Juniper. You taught me something valuable these last few days, and now I know I deserve more than this." He closed the suitcase, grabbed his keys, and walked out without a backward glance. The sound of the lock clicking was the last thing Juniper heard before the silence became unbearable. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.